me, when is it going to be time for you to enjoy the cash flow? When is it going to be time for you to enjoy the money instead of having a big money bin or something? After I have a big money bin and I still have extra money, that's when you start to enjoy it, not before. And the idea that you should spend every dime that you have and enjoy it now, it shows to me just a lack of critical thinking and creativity. And I'll give you an example.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hannes Henschel. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Emma Powell from Highrise Group in Utah. And, she actually asked me not to introduce her too much, so we're going to skip that part and just dive straight in. Welcome, Emma.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to meet you.
Yeah, so we're actually going to speak a little bit about why it's great to have a podcast in the first place, because that's something that before we hit the record button, we already hit it up, and we will take it right from here, and then we will go into where Emma came from, why real estate, and why multifamily. But let's start with branding and podcasting and why it's great for real estate syndicators.
Well, I'll start out with a real estate, analogy, or the reason why you need a podcast if you're going to be in real estate. I have had enough properties now, from single family homes to mobile home to institutional size properties, new construction, heavy construction. I've managed a lot of different real estate properties now, and I'll tell you that the time that it takes you to manage a property, whether it's a 2-unit or a 200-unit, if you're doing a heavy construction, is almost the same. And so I figured out very early that I don't really like asset management. I'm not really good at it. The day-to-day dragging of every day and the stress of just figuring out if something goes wrong. I'm the kind of person who wants like a giant emergency fund, and it's really not going to make the deal successful if it's as big as I want. And so I'm always stressed out every time we have to spend it on something unexpected, a contingency. That's what it's there for. But no, I don't want to spend it. I just want it to sit in like the bank and just look at it. So that was something that made me realize like I'm not really cut out for asset management. And so I switched over to more of the capital raising side of things, where I'm looking to bring value into deals by signing on loans, bringing in capital, bringing in partners who know what we're doing, consulting, things like that. And I realized the size of the deal is only limited by the size of the capital pile that you can bring into it. And so if you can do a 2-unit, it's almost the same. People think it's a lot different, but once you do a couple of them, you realize it's not that different going bigger or going nicer. And so the more money you can raise, the bigger deal you can do. It's not so much about asset type or experience that way. It's about how much money you can put into it. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. I don't want to dive too much into those, but by and large, that was what I discovered. And then when I realized, okay, well, we're going to make this shift, capital raising is more of a marketing game. And so as a former marketer, it really does fit in a lot better with the way that I am used to doing things. So when I realized like, hey, if I'm going to be doing this capital raising thing and I need to be able to bring in capital to be able to do larger deals, both in joint ventures and with limited partners, then part of that is, you got to get a website, you got to get a social media presence, you got to be on these places where you can market yourself. Interviewing on other people's podcasts was a big thing for me for a while, until I realized my reluctance to get my own podcast has been like somebody in the 90s who's refusing to get their first website. And it's not because I'm trying to make a podcast that's going to be top downloaded or award winning or any of that. It's just part of my brand. When people are researching me, if they want to do business with me, they're going to go and listen to a couple of my podcast episodes. And like I said, I've been hacking into other people's for a while. But there's nothing like having your own marketing platform to give your own brand credibility. It's not about competing with everybody else and their dog who already has one. That's like saying, I don't need a website because so-and-so who does something similar already has a website, so I'll just let him have one. It's better than mine anyway. It's ridiculous. So we need a podcast.
And you've already been guests on, as we just counted it out, almost 50 podcasts, including Bigger Pockets. So you had enough of a runway here. It's time to get it started.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I've been putting it off is because I'm not trying to grow a big syndication business. I'm trying to grow a passive income business, and things like podcasts and active social media and asset management are not really conducive to a passive income type of a business. But I realized if I do want capital raising to be more of a side hustle than a full-time thing, then a podcast would enhance my business being more hands-off, more of a part-time side hustle. Because if I don't have these types of marketing platforms to stand on, it's going to be what we call dialing for dollars, where you are just saying, hey, we got a deal. And that's very labor intensive. And I realized, okay, well, I'm going to have to spend some labor on this passive income business. It should be something that I'm better at and that I enjoy doing more than calling people for asking. I'm never going to call somebody and do the ask. Partially because I personally feel very uncomfortable with that because it makes them feel uncomfortable. And it's just not really part of the brand that I want to build. And so I decided a couple of months ago, I'm never going to do dialing for dollars. I'm never going to call and do the ask. If people want to put money in one of my deals, they know where to find me.
So how do you ask without asking? You basically positioning yourself in such a way that it's like, hey, you know where to find me, come and call me up, and then you can wire your money.
Yep. And it's the same thing that we're all doing, where we're using the deals that we have done and we're talking about them on our podcast. We're interviewing on other people's podcasts. We're putting before and afters on social media. We're talking about our own journey of seeking passive income, spend more time with our families. And if people want to build a syndication business, I have an option for that too. You can join our Monday Night Club. And those are for people who are not looking to just be limited partners. They want to be general partners, or limited partners who want to come in and just put your cash in because they want to invest their time to learn how to invest in something like this and then step away and let the other people run it. So it's the same stuff that everybody's already doing, except you have to also put out there, just say it straight. I am not ever going to call you and ask you for money. And that's part of a little video you could do as a Facebook Live. You could put it on your website. I think that type of straight shooting and almost humor is it's unusual in our industry because we're all trying to be very serious and talk about trust and fiduciary duty. And sometimes we forget to just be ourselves and just throw a little tongue in cheek in there and just be real.
Yesterday I went to a family office conference, and it was like here in New York, super stiff. And I felt like there was maybe 2-3 people that had a bit of a character in the scene. And I was a bit out of place because this was like super institutional grade. I was like, okay, it's probably a bit above my league, but nevertheless, I wanted to check it out. And everybody was so stiff. There was no character. And then there was a lawyer and me who were just like cracking off because we were a bit characters in the scene compared to everybody else. And we hit it off over food because, I'm a former chef, and he was telling me how he wants to open up this bagel joint in South Carolina. And then, these super serious people from Graham from Boston who managed over $20 billion came and just joined us in the conversation. And they were like, so what are you talking about? And we're like, well, he's want to hit up this bagel joint in South Carolina. It's like his retirement dream, and I want to turn 100. And they looked at us like we lost it because they just wanted to sell us their alternative investment schemes, whereas $1 million minimum.
Well, when we get to the point where I can start looking at those, I'll know I've arrived. Like the first signal that I arrived was that I needed a spreadsheet to track all the properties that I owned. That was like first base, where I was like, wait, what's the address on that one again? Or where's that one again? Or my husband was like, wait a second, how many houses do we have? Or how many properties do we have? So you get your spreadsheet, and then you have goals, then to become an accredited investor, then a qualified purchaser, and then looking at deals where it's $250,000, $500,000, $1 million minimum. Not saying that those were particularly good investments, but I think there's always something to shoot for in this business. There's always something to learn. There's always somewhere to grow. And for me right now, honestly, it's growing my YouTube channel and getting a podcast, because those have been things I've been really resistant to doing. But once I got started, I realized, well, this isn't as hard as I thought it would be. It wasn't as much work as I thought it would be. And it sure is a lot more fun than dialing for dollars.
Yeah. One of the things I realized yesterday, because you said, it's there's always something else. The next level is always there. And it's actually insane where this can go. Like the league of people that I surrounded myself with yesterday, I was like, this is insane. Like there were families in the room that buy multiple $100 million buildings in New York City. And I was like, yeah. So this is what the true institutional level looks like, because you and me sometimes say that we buy institutional grade assets. And while that might be true, those kind of family offices, they literally buy them in bulk, which kind of blew my mind yesterday. It's just like you said, you and me, and also part of our audience, we are happy to make work optional, have passive income stream, become accredited investors, and to kind of live life on our terms. And then there's this completely different level. And some of us strive to be there. But one of the things I realized yesterday, I actually think I'm more optimizing for a really amazing experience of life than trying to get to the level that I saw yesterday.
Yeah.
And I actually want to take as many people in my community with me as possible to, to live life on their terms, make work optional, and, do what they want to do.
It's a question we all have to ask ourselves, like, where is it that we're going here? What's the quality of life that we're after? And that's another reason that I decided I don't want to be in day-to-day asset management or even deal finding. I'm okay at deal finding for my own deals. Most of the deals that I did as a lead sponsor were deals that I found or deals that I brought in. A couple of them other people brought to me, but it was like holding a porcupine. They're like, how do I handle this? So they bring me in to help like that. But I realized, how do I want to spend my time? If my husband is able to quit his job as W-2, which right now he doesn't want to, and there's really no reason to. But when we get to that point, I didn't want to just switch out his W-2 for him coming and working in a big business that sucked up all of my time. If you truly want passive income and have your time back, you really need to grow with a focus on what the quality of life is that you're looking for, lifestyle design. And to me, those things that you're talking about might come later, but it's certainly not the goal. It would be something to do to keep me busy after I've decided that I no longer want to be on a beach in Mexico anymore. So we're talking more sabbatical than retirement, but it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah. So where did your money mindset come from? Where did the wisdom come from to get the first property on your Excel sheet?
Oh boy. I can't, I've looked back on that.
So many people these days wonder whether the real estate market.
Sorry.
What are people wondering about in the real estate market? Don't worry, we can cut that out.
I've got, my phone is I'm worried that my phone is gonna ring. Let me see. I've lost there it is. Okay, sorry. We'll clap to tell the editor, like, stop here. All right. So the question you asked me was, how did I get into the point of wanting my first real estate investment?
Yes. How did you get where the money mindset came from, in order to get your first property on the Excel sheet?
It was a lot of little things that added up into this kind of drive to be an entrepreneur and to make a lot of money in as little amount of time as possible. I'm not saying that passive income is a myth, but it's kind of a myth. So we're looking for what I like to refer to as residual income, where you can do some work up front and then with some monitoring or some babysitting, you can let it go mostly on its own. And it's kind of like having kids. I mean, I've got adult kids now, and they come home every once in a while and they need my attention. They need my love. They need me to be interested in their lives. But do they need me every minute to be feeding them, taking them to the bathroom, driving them to the park? They're not really taking that much of my time and effort anymore. So I would call that similar to passive income. Like, you put in a lot of work up front, like having a baby or having a teenager. And then these young adult kids come back and they have different needs that in some ways are more demanding than they were when they were babies. But at the same time, how much time are they taking from me? How much of my actual minutes of the day? Really not that much. And so I look at passive income the same way. It's an investment of your time that you put in order to get time back later. And anytime you're investing something, it takes work up front to learn about it, to make the money to put in, whatever it is. And so for me, it was just a lot of these little things that came up. Like, I have a big family. I'm from a big family. My mom always worked. My husband's mom always worked. But they always kind of like part-time jobs, stay-at-home moms. And I'd see them scrapping around selling cosmetics and doing the party plan of things, or making little types of things like you would see in an Etsy shop nowadays, and selling them to their friends, and really just spending a lot of time trying to bring some extra money into the family. And watching that as a little kid, and then as a young adult when my husband and I were married, just taking a step back and thinking to myself, what do I want my money-making ability to look like? Because I'm not married into money. I didn't come from money. We had nice white collar, middle class families. And I just never really wanted to be scrambling around trying to raise kids, trying to keep a house clean, and then trying to run businesses on top of that, unless the businesses made a lot of money. And when I realized with my photography business that I could shoot one house per week, I was a real estate photographer for 10 years. If I could shoot one house per week, that was enough money to hire a housekeeper for 4 hours per week. And that was really when the mindset started to shift. It's like, what bill do I have that I want to pay for? Vacations, piano lessons, what a housekeeper, whatever. And then how many photo jobs do I have to do in order to earn that back? The biggest mistake I made during that time was, instead of taking that money I made out of my business, I should have been buying rentals with it and then letting the rentals pay for the lifestyle. But it's the same concept. You decide, what is it that I want? How much money is it going to need to take? And how many deals or how many jobs or whatever do I have to do in order to pay for this thing? Because the time was always of utmost importance, because of watching our stay-at-home cottage business moms and thinking to myself, how do I want to make money? And it wasn't worth being away from my kids for long hours and the stress of having unhappy clients or whatever, unless it was going to be a really big payday.
Yeah. Yeah, I always thought about it, spendings in time, and when I earned very, very few dollars per hour, small spends hurt a lot, because I would translate them into time worked always. So I'm like, hey, I'm not whatever it is, spending $8 on, coffee to go or something, because that's like, that used to be an hour of work when I first came to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I still do that. If I have something that's like $10 a month, or you get an annual subscription for $300 and you split it up by 12 months and like, okay, how much time do I have to work on that? And it's always been in my head, because we came from large families where we had to live pretty frugally to have that many kids. And for me, I just wanted to get to the point where I didn't have to think about it that way anymore. I often joke that I want my money to be like Scrooge McDuck's money bin, where you just dive in and you're swimming around in all your gold coins. I'm not motivated by cars. I'm not motivated by dream homes. In fact, dream homes, I think that they're, my friend is a general contractor. He call it the cathedral to his ego when he built his first custom dream home. And I've just always struggled with that. My mom building her dream home was a big part of me, my young formative years. And I'm like, why do we have this house? Like, why didn't we just put up with the little one and got on more vacations, right? So those kinds of things don't motivate me, but having a big pile of cash motivates me. And it goes back to when I wanted to deal as an asset manager. I want a big pile of working capital. I don't want to spend it. And when I do have to dip into that, it's very stressful for me. So that's what motivates me.
That seems counterintuitive. I feel like, at least living in your dream home, there's some joy and utility to it. But just having a pile of cash is like, that's nice to look at best. But it's just a balance sheet.
There's a security there and a peace of mind that nothing else can buy. And I'm not saying if you're motivated by cars or dream homes or anything that's wrong. What's important to figure out is, what is it that really drives you in order to succeed, to make money? For me, it's big time freedom. And that includes freedom from working, and to get that security to really quit your job and to have more reliance on your passive income. For me, it takes a big pile of money. And so we'll do various ways to keep it so it's not just cash in the bank. But for me, it's very comforting to just know that whatever happens, I can take care of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I think, having those reserves, and like, I'm so glad that we started real estate investment. I will spend the entire winter with my family because my dad isn't doing too well. And, that's just part of why I want people to, realize how powerful real estate investment is, because I've seen my journey and how it made work optional, and I want people to really benefit from that. And I feel like that financial education that isn't, it wasn't taught to me at home. And it looks like your parents are very entrepreneurial, but they also probably didn't immediately teach you, what rental income means for your own security and lifestyle, and the ability to take care of your family. And I mean, you got a really big family yourself now, so you need a lot of rental income.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I'll see people who have 2 kids, or maybe single guys, or people who are just recently married. I'm like, hey, today we quit our jobs. And I'm looking at it like, when is my husband going to be able to quit his job? I have no idea. But when I take a step back to look at it, if I was 25 and a young married person with maybe 1 kid, we would both be work optional already. It's the fact that we have so much more in the way of monthly and annual expenses, college, weddings. We drive crappy old cars, and we live in a frugal way so that when we can quit our jobs, we're ready to do that. We have our big, money bin pile ready to go. But I have to comfort myself in the fact that we would be able to already quit on the amount of cash flow that we have if we just had less expenses. And there are a lot of those we can't get rid of. We had 6 kids. That's the way that it goes. Sorry. And I'm really glad that I did it, because it's more important than money. But that is going to extend the timeline that I have to retire. And so if we had a dream home, if we had a boat, if we were taking expensive vacations, we could do all that. But it would be a lot longer before both of us could be work optional.
Yeah, I'm very much the same school of thought. I'm like, do I really need that Tesla, or do I really? And lucky me, I have a friend who always warned me. He's like, a boat is a hole in the water that you keep throwing in money, and that always stuck with me. And I've seen some of my friends literally spend their life savings on their boats, and not having the money when it was crucial, which is retirement, and that would scare the heck out of me. I don't know. I think one of my biggest fears is actually being poor in old age.
Yeah, and I would, you're so right there, because people ask me, when is it going to be time for you to enjoy the cash flow? When is it going to be time for you to enjoy the money instead of having a big money bin or something? After I have a big money bin and I still have extra money, that's when you start to enjoy it, not before. And the idea that you should spend every dime that you have and enjoy it now, it shows to me just a lack of critical thinking and creativity. And I'll give you an example. I've always wanted horses. When I was a kid, I would follow the kids around that had horses. We lived in a neighborhood that a lot of people had horses, and I'd watch them riding around the neighborhood. And I was like, why don't even my friends have horses? And I was always begging for horseback riding lessons for my parents, and never, no, we can't afford it. Horses are expensive. Lessons are expensive. And when my daughter got she got to her horse crazy phase, and she's like, I want a horse. I want to take horse lessons. And we had a little ranch at this point, and I just could never choke down buying horses. They're just too expensive. They're like yard ornaments, like a boat, right? It's like a hole in your pasture that you throw money at. And so I told her, you ride horses. We have to figure out how to pay for it. And so we found a Girl Scout camp that was a horseback riding camp for a week, where she could go. And if she sold enough Girl Scout cookies, she could get a free week of horse camp. And she loved it so much that we continued to do things like that year after year, where I would send her to a horse camp and she would either pay for half of it herself or babysit for the other, whatever we needed to do. Telling her, like, how can you afford this? Not, it's too expensive, we can't afford it, was huge. And so now I just said, well, I'm just going to pop for horseback riding lessons, because it's a lot cheaper than owning a horse, but we're riding the same horse week after week, and we're getting to enjoy. We're like the horse's aunt or the horse's grandma. We don't have to be the mom. We can enjoy this kind of expensive hobby by being more creative about the way that we spend our money.
And I mean, horse ownership, once you get attached to the horse and there's medical bills, it gets heart-wrenching. Like some of my friends had horses, and they had the income to support having the horse while it's healthy, but once it turned sick, it was heart-wrenching. I don't know. It's nothing I want to get into personally.
Yeah, and with our ranch, I was constantly having to ask myself that question when we'd have an animal sick. It's like, how much is this animal worth in vet bills to me? Because I don't get emotionally attached to my livestock. But I felt like, isn't this kind of like a pet? Should I? And I don't like having to make those kinds of decisions, because they take an emotional toll. And so it's that creativity of, how do I get what I want in as close as possible to getting it without actually having to pay for full price? It's like people that take vacations on their credit card points.
Yeah. That's like me. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine had a very beautiful dog that I really liked. And I would just take it for a walk in Central Park occasionally. And that got me the best of both worlds. I didn't have the dog at my home, but I got the dog walk that I wanted.
You're the dog uncle, which is a great place to be.
I'm the dog. I guess other people call it dog walking and they get paid for it.
This is how we found our horseback riding instructor. Is I found out she had horses that she needed to exercise because she does endurance races, so like backcountry races, and she had too many horses to exercise. So I like, hey, we'll come over and help you. And after a while, I said, hey, I need to start paying you for lessons. She said, sure, let's do that. So it's just another layer of networking, finding people who have what you want, figuring out how you can add value to them. And I'll give you an example of the credit card traveling. I was in a forum where we're learning how to travel on our credit card points. And there were some other real estate investors that I knew in those groups, wealthy guys, like making way more money than I am. And they're here traveling on their credit card points. And I made a joke. I said, do you think you can afford to take like a vacation without having to spend the time chasing after credit card points? And he said, sure, I could, but why would I when I can do this? So it's how much time do you want to invest versus money? And for me, it's a spectrum. First, you have no money, you're investing 100% time for getting paid or whatever. And eventually you get to the point where like, I'm just going to pay someone to do it because it's not worth my time. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle still.
So for someone who wants to pass these ideas or lines of thoughts on to the children, how did you manage to do it with your kids? I mean, some of your kids are still younger, but some are already, in their mid-20s. So how did you pass on a healthy money mindset?
It's a lot of conversation, and that's one thing I do well at. And it's why I finally did a YouTube channel. I would just start recording videos where I'm just blah, blah, blahing, no script. And then I can take that
and then
edit out.
You send your kids to your YouTube channel?
Seriously, they're watching me do this. I'm bringing them to networking meetings. Some of my older kids are having to start to watch my YouTube videos, but it's all a question of doing what comes naturally to you and exploiting that as much as you possibly can. And for me, it's talking. And so when we're driving in the car with the kids or whatnot, we're always talking about, and to the point where they're like, Mom, stop talking about money, stop talking about real estate. And my 16-year-old brought this up to me really recently in a way that taught me a good lesson, where she had tried out for a community play and had gotten a small part, but she still had to be at all of the rehearsals, and it was really burning her out. She said, I really want to quit. And I said, you've made a commitment to go to this as much as possible, and I don't think that you should quit because you're going to have a good experience. She said, well, it's taking a lot of time away from me to be able to work more hours at work. I said, well, you work at a fast food restaurant. Why on earth would you trade up the experience of doing a live theater performance that you enjoy for getting more hamburgers in a bag? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And she says, well, Mom, you're always telling me I'm 16. I got to start saving up for a car. I have to start saving up for my first house hack, my first rental. And I'm not going to be able to do that if I take 2 weeks off of work to do all these dress rehearsals. And I realized I had given her the impression that life is all about a money race, and it's not about the experiences. I said, you will always remember this play, your first play, but you will never remember that day or those 2 weeks that you bagged more burgers. If I've given you the impression that this is all about money, then I have done something wrong. So I think you need to stay in the play. You need to live it up, take 2 weeks off of work, and just enjoy yourself. There's plenty of time to make more money later. And that was a good lesson for me because I was giving this impression to my kids, which was completely the opposite of what I was trying to teach them.
Yeah. It's interesting you said it. A couple of years ago, one of my acquaintances says, like, I feel like you speak so much about money, Hannes. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure that I will speak a lot about money these days, but you will worry a lot about money later when I won't.
That's awesome.
But that's you see, the reason I'm worrying or I'm speaking about money right now is because I have too many people in my immediate surroundings who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s who don't have money and they don't have choices, and I don't want to be one of them.
Yep.
So I feel like I much rather dial in now and think about it now than actually having to worry about it later when I don't have any more leverage or energy left to change it.
Yeah. Well, watching what other people are going through and the struggles that they're having and being able to extrapolate lessons for your own life from that's a huge skill. And I think that sometimes we undervalue it, but most people are not capable of doing what you just described.
Well, I don't know where, I think it comes from my dad. My dad, he never taught me lessons by speaking, so I had to become observant. And yes. I feel like in the last decade, I learned a lot of lessons simply by observing people around me. I'm like, so what are people struggling with when they hit their 60s? Like the mother of one of my friends, I was literally sitting at the table with her when she was doing her Social Security calculations. And it was so disappointing because I saw the pain in her eyes when she not only figured it's not going to be enough to live where she wants to live, she also has to work 3 years longer than she thought.
Yeah.
And the pain that I saw in her eyes, that this just stuck with me, you know, and all of those moments pulled together that like really made me realize, I mean, the reason this podcast is called The Path to Wealth, it's because it's between, you know, being healthy and wealthy. And I think that's where a good life comes from. And I've seen more people around me that didn't have it. You know, they didn't have the choices. They didn't have the backup money to make the kind of moves that they wanted, or maybe build that dream house that we spoke about, or retire on their terms, or even live in the town that they would have liked to retire in because it wasn't within the budget of their social security. And I just never wanted to become a victim of that. And that's all pretty much through observation. Yeah, it's like lessons I learned by the people around me.
And that's the benefit of being in a large family. I was the 7th of 8 kids. I'm watching a lot of older siblings go through things that I would be observing and thinking to myself, do I want to emulate that or do I want to avoid that? And it's not always the fact that they're making poor choices. I'll give you one example. When I got married, 3 of my sisters and 2 of my sister-in-laws were spending a lot of money on fertility treatments. And I was watching this like, oh, there's something going on here, right? And so I didn't ever talk to them about it. It's a very private subject. And so I just talked to my doctor about it and I let her know what was going on with my family. And so she ran a bunch of tests and diagnosed me with basically the same thing that they had. And she said, I don't think if I were you that I would wait to have kids. And she said, I'm not telling you what to do, but don't think that you have plenty of time. Just start figuring out if you want kids, like how early, the earliest possible you feel comfortable having them. And so I went and I told my fiance at the time what was going on. And so we decided to just wait like a year and start having kids. And so that's what we did. And we had our first baby really, really quickly, very easily. But then later when the infertility kicked in and I started having problems with this diagnosis, I really was glad that we hadn't waited. We had at least one child because I was watching them go through expensive adoptions. People are like, oh, adoption's an option. I'm like, adoption's super expensive and it's heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching. And when you get a baby placed and then the birth mother decides she's taking it back, like I don't have a problem with adoption from that, but just gearing myself up to go through that, what my family members were going through, I just felt like, hey, I'm going to learn from what they're going through. Not by any of their own choices, but I'm just going to watch and observe, and I'm going to make decisions based on that are best for me and best for my family. And looking back on it, as nervous as I was to have my first baby, I'm really, really glad that we were able to observe and learn those lessons and have the experts around us that we needed to give us good advice of what it turned out to be.
Yeah. So where do you think in the common upbringing of people, where does it come from, that sense of having the right kind of guidance around or seeking it out? Because see, you and me, we are in a space where we do that. We seek out advisors, if it's doctors or when it comes to financial advice or CPAs, but I feel like it's not that common. And how do we encourage people to step into having that ability to respond, or, you know, basically stepping into their own responsibility? Just like you said, you wanted to have children and you were like making those tests and you made adjustments accordingly, but that takes ownership, you know? And I feel like there's maybe a chunk of the population that doesn't like to have that level of ownership.
And that's true. And the diagnosis like that came with some really, really restrictive lifestyle requirements to keep it in check, you know, diet, exercise, stress control, things like that. And it was really, really hard, very, very difficult. And I look back on it and I ask myself, like, where did this come from? Because I'd love to be able to teach my kids how to take that kind of ownership, how to do that kind of work when it's really, really important. I think it really just boils down to what's really important to you and what your deep-seated beliefs are. And if you need to change them, the way to change them is to change very, very small micro things about your life. You always hear take massive action, which massive action is a lot of micro actions stacked up. And so if you want massive action, instead of focusing on this goal where I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. every morning and I'm going to go work out and I'm going to sign up for an Ironman and I'm going to make $10 million next year, those types of huge goals are how some people are motivated. And if that's what works for you, then that's what you should do. But if you find yourself being beat down, competition, everybody's more successful than me, I'm so tired, I don't know if this is worth it anymore. I've chosen rather to focus on tiny micro adjustments, because I feel like those tiny little things that you do in your life, like I am going to meditate for 15 minutes when I wake up naturally without an alarm clock. There's no 5 a.m. And I'm going to lie in bed. I'm not going to get up and do the whole Om thing. I'm just going to lie in bed. And if I fall back to sleep while I'm meditating, I'm just going to say, that's my body's way of telling me that I needed more sleep, and not beating myself up when I'm saying think nothing and suddenly I'm thinking about something. Like, I'm just going to bring my thought back to think nothing. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm not cut out for this, I can't meditate, because every time I try, my mind wanders. Meditation experts' minds wander. Just bring it back and just do little micro adjustments. And that's just one example. But I'll share a story about a partner of mine where he is from a very, very successful and influential family that even when I first moved to Utah from Texas, I already knew who they were. I'd already heard their names. And I was shocked when I found out that my partner was a member of this family. And I asked him, I said, what's that like being raised in that family? And he said that he never had to wonder if he could be successful, if he deserved to be successful, if he had what it took to be successful. He said, I always assumed that it was always a baseline given. He says, whereas most people, and specifically referring to me, that's something that you have to spend a lot of time working through, those head games of whether or not you're even going to try doing this, or whether you deserve it, or having imposter syndrome and all of that. He said, I never had to deal with that. And it has saved him a lot of time. He got started a lot younger. He had success a lot younger. And I feel like that was just all those little micro things that happened to him in his upbringing of just being around people who were successful. And it was just kind of a given that he could achieve that as well.
But I get it. But at the same time, I feel like it could also be the exact opposite of the spectrum, where being in such a family that the pressure feels so high that you wonder if you can actually live up to it. I think there's some.
And that was another lesson he told me. He's watched money destroy a lot of people in his family with addictions, overdoses, and bad financial decisions, bad investments, because of exactly what you're describing. And I think the only way I can describe that is when you look at the origin story of Saya, a comic book superhero, and the origin story of his arch villain, they're very, very similar. They both had struggles. You know, Batman lost his parents early and Joker had some kind of trauma, right? But at the end, it's how they chose to look at it and how they chose to deal with it. The villain and the hero have almost the same origin story every single time. Are you going to take that as something to learn from and make your life better? Or are you going to take it to something to make you bitter and victimized and maybe even pushing it out onto other people, this violence or this resentment? You have to make the choice. And if we could figure out the message, or if we could figure out the method of making those kinds of choices, we would be rich, because you never know how those trials or those hardships are going to go.
You know, one thing I kind of realized yesterday being at that family office space, and Tony Robbins talks a lot about the thermostat where we feel comfortable. And, you know, at the real estate conferences, I'm very comfortable with everybody there, everybody in the multifamily industry, no matter how kind of big shot they were. But yesterday in that family office space, I felt like my thermostat is off, or my temperature is off. I felt like I'm not in the right environment. And it's obviously part of, you know, how do I look at the moment and what's happening here right now? But I clearly felt like I'm in the wrong place, you know, almost that typical imposter syndrome.
I think that's a good sign. That's a positive sign, because it means that you're pushing your boundaries, you're stretching, you're growing. I know I took my 18-year-old daughter to a high net worth entrepreneurial retreat in Mexico, and because my husband's passport is expired, and I'm like, well, who has a valid passport? Get on the plane, right? So she came down and she was feeling very fish out of water, very out of place. She was obviously the youngest one there. And it was a lot of very successful people, you know, chairman of the board and CEOs of some large organizations that she'd actually heard of. You know, so she was very intimidated and really struggling. But by the time we left, after, I don't know, it was 5 days a week, something like that, she said, I've really been buying into this story that rich people are greedy, and evil and selfish. And I just spent a week with some of the richest people I probably will ever meet in my life, or at least for the time being. She said, and they were so nice, and they didn't have anything to sell. They didn't have any ulterior motive. They literally were at this event to help other people, especially the older ones who were kind of around, retirement age. And they would pull her aside at those networking tables, and they would just sit there and just so interested in her. Tell me about what you're working on. Tell me what your goals are, and trying to figure out people they could introduce her to or ways that they could help her. Those are the kind of people that you want to be around.
Yeah,
even though she
definitely.
was very out of place and she was there kind of on accident. It was the most powerful experience I think she's ever had in her entire life, and has changed her mindset around success and money completely. Even though she was raised with me, that was a powerful formative experience for her.
And one of the things that ties into this is what beliefs we have around money, and what you said, that she mentioned that, they're not greedy in that sense. I actually, going to many different conferences, I figured there is nobody who's like straight up evil ever. Everything is, all the actions we see in the world are somewhat incentivized. And the question is, what is the incentive structure in those corporations that might do something that the rest of society sees as evil? But there's incentives everywhere. And I don't think that they're like straight up evil people anywhere.
Mm-mm. And I was listening to something the other day about what it takes to get into the World Economic Forum. I've never really understood what it was, but everybody's talking about it so much recently. What is this organization? And it turns out you have to fill out an application. You don't have to be, but most people are billionaires, and the membership is like $500,000. And I'm looking at that, and everybody's calling this organization evil and terrible and all of this. And I'm looking at that thinking, like, first of all, if for me, it would be so far out of my realm of understanding of being in a group of people that are performing at that level. But at the same time, somebody was talking about what do you do when you're a billionaire and you don't ever have to really worry about money again, and that's no longer a motivator for you? What do you go after next? Typically power. And that's where it starts to get a little bit off the rails. I think the pursuit of money, because it's a proxy for power, can be extremely dangerous. When you have a pursuit of money as a proxy for freedom or having your time back, that's a very different exercise.
Yeah. I always think of it as a tool for impact, and if you want to shift anything in the world, if you want to create change, it takes a lot of resources, whether it's your time or you have money and it can buy you other people's time. Change in the world takes resources, and I think the same, even more so, is maybe true in the US. If you want to run for anything here, you need a lot of donors, and if you don't have donors, you need your own money.
And that's the system that we live in. My son is kind of going through this period where he's analyzing his life, and has boomers ruined everything, and am I ever going to be able to be successful? And wondering, socialism sounded like a pretty good idea. And I said, well, I used to live in a post-communist country right after the wall fell. And I will tell you from my experience,
send him to Cuba for a week.
Yep. I said, go.
Cure him.
And I'm not telling you that I disagree with what you're thinking, but you're not going to know if you like it or if it's the right choice for you until you get over there. I spent half a year in a communist country, and it was a pretty harrowing experience for a young person. And I said, if you get over there and you decide that you think it's great, you love it, then that's awesome. I'm glad that you found that for yourself. But you really have to get out there and test your ideas and see if that's the direction that you want to be going. And I told a friend of mine, she was getting really involved in a political cause. I can't remember what it was, but some local political issue. And she was knocking on doors and passing out little flyers and talking everywhere in the button, putting it all over social media. Her social media was all about this issue for a while. And she asked me what I thought about it. And I said, well, I think you're spending way too much time on it because you're trying to become a real estate investor. And instead, you're spending a ton of time basically being a free laborer for this initiative. I said, if you really want to change something, just look at the system. Just sit back and say, what system do I live in? What system do I exist in? Nobody's going to listen to you or let you try and change anything until you're rich. And I just put it out there very bluntly. And she said, oh, you're right. And she even went to talk to her husband about it. And he said, well, you're not wrong. And I think that's sad. But we're never going to be able to change it until we can succeed in the system that we're in And then we can put some resources into making a difference. And for me, that is time freedom. Because what happens when people have time freedom and they're work optional? Suddenly, they're like, hey, well, what about this philanthropic cause? What about this charity? What about volunteering? What about helping others do? And you have the ability to start thinking along those terms. And if that's what you want to do in our system, you have to become financially free first so that you have the time and resources freed up so that you can then go get something done. And that comes along with the network. Think about this mastermind that we were in Mexico. Who are the first people that I want to call when I come across something I'm very, very passionate about it and I need help? I need introductions. I need donations. I need direction and experience, how to start a nonprofit, whatever it is. Now I have a network of people that can help me go out and do that after I get time and financial freedom. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, but I 100% agree. And I think that, once work becomes optional for people, while they might go to the beach in Mexico first and have like a sabbatical year I know that gets boring at some point. I've done it and other people have done it. And I know enough people who are eventually, as you said, they're turning towards courses that are close to their heart. And I think the more people we can help to make it optional, and the better the community gets, because have people who have resources, who can make change, who have time to influence people and support causes, and that's I think is the beauty of investing, and that's one of the key reasons I'm in real estate.
I need to get my time back, because I think the stereotype that my daughter had was that rich people have to work all the time and all they care about is money. And if you're taking this pursuit of financial freedom as a way to buy back your time and your mental energy and your emotions so that you can go and serve others. And I feel very motivated to help others achieve that, because then we're creating like a little army of philanthropists who are going out and doing good and magnifying any good that I could do by teaching other people how to go out and do the same thing. And I think I feel much more passionate about that than I do about any particular cause, although I do have a couple of ideas there. I really want to just bring as many people along as possible so together we can make a big impact.
Yeah, likewise. One of the key reasons I like to extend this to former chefs is because in Germany, the average chef dies at 57. Stressful. When I first saw that data, I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
I'm like, people need to have a choice here.
Well, it's funny that you bring this up, because we have a local real estate investing club like most areas do. And recently we had a former chef speaking to us about how to start a real estate business. And not so much an investing business. He was doing wholesaling, finding cheap houses, and then marketing them and make a little bit of money on each transaction. And it was amazing to watch how he had taken all of his knowledge of the process of getting food from the refrigerator out to the table and the process management that had to go along, and how he had adapted that to fit into his business, and basically assigning everybody the job and how to monitor all of that. That skill that he got, I never would have thought that a chef would make a great investor, but he went through the process, and I thought, wow, this guy really had to learn a lot about how to work on stressful terms, time crunches, and having his processes extremely well organized in order to get everything out plated to the table warm all at the same time. And it was a testament to me that whatever it is that you did in life before you started your investing business, you have skills that can be adapted over to what you're doing now, which is why we see so many medical doctors and IT guys and chefs, and me as a former marketer in this space, because it doesn't matter what skill we have, we can apply it somehow, that we can form a niche inside of real estate investing and really just function to our full potential in that little niche with our previous skill set. We cross-train it.
100%. I actually think it's super interesting how especially in the syndication, there's really a piece for everybody. Like I haven't met anybody who doesn't who is willing to pick it up and learn the ropes, who eventually finds their place in the syndication. It's like, hey, this really, relates to my experience, and I can do this very well.
I know a lot of investors who are I don't know the right word to use, but very proud that they don't have any partners and they've done it all by themselves because they're getting to keep 100% of the pie. Well, even then not. You have to share it with your vendors. Your lawyers get some, your accountant gets some, your property manager gets some, but they don't want any business partners. They're okay to have vending partners, and they're even okay to have money partners, but they don't want any business partners to share that workload and share that control. And if that works for them because they're a generalist and they like having 100% of the pie, again, I'm never going to argue with something that is working for somebody. If they feel happy that way and they feel success, but time and time again, some of these investors have come to me and said, okay, you know what? I've just gotten to the edge of what I can accomplish on my own. How do I form a partnership when they finally get to the point? Now, not everybody will. A lot of people have great, successful real estate careers that are working on a solo or with a spouse. But when you get to the point when you're ready to scale, you have to be open to that it's okay. Because what I found is a lot of people who have partners will scoff at the people who don't. And a lot of the people who don't have partners are very proud of it and scoff at the people who do. And I have deals where I'm the 100% owner, and I have deals where I'm a 0.005% owner. It's all about doing what works and taking advantage of the opportunities that are coming out of your network. Sometimes it's like, hey, I got a mobile home that it has a note on it. You guys want to take over the note? And I'm like, well, I got a couple of teenagers that I'm trying to teach about real estate investing. So let's go pick up this mobile home note. We'll all pool our money and they can learn about it on the small scale, where normally I wouldn't want to buy that by myself, even though it was a really great deal. It was a fantastic teaching ground for them. And somebody else will come to me and say, hey, I have a 120 unit in this place and I don't know how to manage it. I need some help. Let's put a team together. And so then I'll take it over and I'll just take a teeny tiny bit of equity for my little portion in getting the thing up and running.
Yeah. Well, it's all about opportunity. And I think right now we're in an environment where people are concerned about where the yield is and where the opportunities are. And I think what I'm hearing from you and kind of goes along with my personal thesis is that if you're open to it, there's always opportunity. And especially as someone like yourself who wants to deploy capital, I think you can always follow the best operators in the best markets.
Yes.
Like
and
there's go ahead.
Oh, so that's just one thing that the Investing Club, that's the whole premise of the Investing Club, is when I was getting burned out on being an asset manager and I had all these people who were like, hey, I've got 50 grand or I've got 100 grand or I can raise 250. I want to come be co-GP with you on your deal. And I'm like, you know what, the size of deals we're doing, 50 grand, 100 grand, that's limited partner territory. And raising 250 is like, people don't talk to you until you can get at least 500, maybe $1 million. And they're frustrated because they can't get out of the gate. And so it's again, that thing of taking little pieces of what everybody can give and then magnifying that into something bigger. Well, we'll go after operators who are doing like we closed an institutional deal, almost $100 million this summer with our club. And I think we only brought in it was less than $1 million what we ended up bringing in as a club member, but we got a little sliver of input. I wouldn't say control or management control, but we got a sliver of input that's beyond limited partner because we were able to say look, what we're really good at here is not what you need to start your own syndication business. And let's come in a much lower barrier of entry, learn how to do this because I love how we spent kind of 80% of this interview on mindset. And
because that's what it's really about. That's what keeps most people back. The mechanics, I believe at least, you can pick those up and they're out there and there are other people more qualified than myself interviewing operators. But I think the mindset is really where the juice is, and that's where most people get hung up on.
Well, but when you have decided I am doing this, and you listen to a lot of podcasts and all they're talking about is mindset. You're like, okay, I got the mindset. I'm ready to do it. How do I do it? And so the club, I think, answers a lot of that for people because we're actually doing it in a very small way, taking little slivers of equity or just negotiating for better terms. Every deal looks a little bit different. But for people who have done this before, like me, who want to step back, and people who have never done it before and who are wanting to ramp up, we can kind of come together in the same space. And we've got fund managers who are just looking to place maybe a couple $100,000 because they can't find a deal that they want to go raise $1 million for, but if they don't use this money, it's going to walk away. And they'll see one of ours and they're like, hey, I got 250 grand. I'm going to go raise another 100. Let's do this deal. And it lets these fund managers get their capital placed in a lot faster, or it lets operators who just haven't found a good deal and they have a couple of investors or some of their own money that they need to place. And I can't find anything good. It's harder to find a good deal when you have to be the lead deal finder. It's really easy to find a deal when you're going to leverage other people who are bringing you deals looking for capital. I mean, they get deals coming out our ears, right? It's harder to find money, in my opinion, than it is to find a good deal. But everybody has different talents and skill sets. So I just feel like that's one thing that we can do together, is just lower the barrier of entry and then focus in the club on the tactics. Like, this is the how. We're going to do due diligence. Like, what does this ratio mean? What is that? That's 5% of what we do overall, but it's nearly 100% of what we do inside the club, because when people are hungry for those tactics, you have to have a place to go find them. And so I figured, let's just go do some deals. Let's just get some deals done. And if you like it, great. You can start a syndication business. If not, now you know, and it was free.
So where can people connect with the club? Give them something actionable so they can connect with you.
There you go. See, we're getting into the 5% tactics part now of all of this. So it's just a website, www.highrise.group/contact. And if you go to /join, it'll basically walk you through like what it looks like to be a limited partner versus what it looks to be like an active joint venture partner. And you get to pick which one of those is going to fit you better. I found a lot of people out there running quote unquote investing clubs that are for limited partners only, where they're just going to notify you when they have a new deal. And it's not really a club because you don't ever talk to the other club members. Because limited partners, that's the whole point, is you don't need to have all these partners that you don't know, that you've never met. You don't want control over a deal as a limited partner, because that means all the other limited partners would get control too. And so that's what you hear of an investment club. It's just a notification list for limited partners. So we do that, definitely. If you want to be an LP, like really that's where everybody ought to be, because it's a lot less work. But if you really want to be an active investor, we've got a track for that too, which has been completely ignored up until this point, unless you wanted to buy some sort of educational course. And so my securities attorney and I were able to sit down and be like, here's a hole. Here's my possible solution. Is this legal? And working out all the details to make sure that we're coloring inside the lines as far as the Securities and Exchange Commission is concerned. So we allow people to get hands-on with deals. For the club is free, with either their own money putting in, raising capital, or contributing effort and skills into the deals that we do. Because we've got like commercial insurance agents in there who are able to review the policy. We've got securities attorneys in there. We've got people in there who have run other businesses. We've got people in there who have zero experience, and they just help out where they can with like some minor admin tasks. So it really just depends where you are, what skills you already have, how we can cross-train it. If you want to be an active investor, come join in the club. If you want to be a limited partner, we have lots and lots and lots of opportunities that you can look at, because we're not just bringing you our own deals. We're looking at deals from the best operators that we can find.
Yeah. So are those then considered like actual JVs, or is it like a co-GP structure, or how is it structured? Because you just
legally, it's an LLC that we create for each deal that we do, and everybody inside of that LLC is basically in a lowercase joint venture. An uppercase joint venture is just you have a document where your two entities are coming together to do a particular project. But we actually do form an LLC. We use a website called TribeVest, where we can go in and they handle our bank account and our LLC renewals, our operating agreement templates, all of that. So that's been actually a great platform and made it a lot easier for us to collaborate on deals. And so legally, we're coming into it through the SEC's investing club carve out. So if you follow these set of rules, you're considered an investing club. You're not offering securities, and there's no SEC regulation. But because we're bumping up against the edge of that with raising capital or basically joining into general partnerships where we have to have a legitimate role, we can't just bring in money and then get equity for that. That's illegal. And so being able to say, okay, all of these details where we're bumping up against securities regulations, we need to get all of those worked out to make sure that we are really coloring inside the lines. And so that's what we really work on inside the club, is keeping our legal bounds black. We don't want gray lines, because
that sounds like it's very case by case specific, where you need to go back to see, okay, does that actually fit the regulations here?
Yeah. And the way that I think everything that we're doing functions inside the investing club. We're not offering securities. Can we advertise the club if we're looking at a 506B that week? We have lots of disclaimers. We've talked to, probably a dozen attorneys over the last year and a half, because they all say something a little bit different, and start to identify the patterns of what we're hearing over and over again and adopting those. And when they disagree, that we go out and we get other opinions and figure out like, okay, where's this disagreement and how are we going to handle this as a group? And so that's just part of being responsible. When you're dealing with other people's money, the SEC can end your life if you don't do it right. So we're pretty conscientious about making sure that we are really in that investment club carve out. And if we are negotiating for a little piece of the GP, then we're actually offering services that they're going to use that's commensurate with the amount of equity we have, which is not a whole lot, right? But that we are contributing according to about the amount of equity that we negotiated for.
Yep. Well, that was super interesting. I actually wasn't aware of that carve out of the investor club. So that's something new to look in for me.
I read an article recently, Investing Clubs Are Cool Again. That was the title of it. It's basically like why they went out of style, because people were banding together to get lower transaction fees, because it was like E-Trade. Remember, it was like $10 a trade, right? But if you can band together 50, 100 people and you're all buying these stocks together, then you get $10 for all of you to buy into that. And it's an LLC, and they have rules about how many deals you're allowed to turn down before you get kicked out of the club, how much money you have to put in every month. We don't really function in quite that same way. And that's why they've fallen out of favors, because you got like low trade fees, M1 where it's free, things like that. The investing clubs just haven't really been important anymore in the same way. But then when TribeVest came along and I started hearing whispers of it, I'm like, what exactly is it that they're doing over there? And they're basically just putting their money together as a group in order to go negotiate for what they want. In a traditional investing club with stocks, it was transaction fees. And even E-Trade disrupted clubs to a certain extent, because before then it was even more expensive to trade. And it's just, they've been slowly falling out of favor as it's been getting easier and easier and easier to make these trades. And so I've seen it start to tick up again now that people are doing joint ventures. Because in 2013, the SEC completely changed the way that you can advertise these deals by introducing the 506C. And now we can actually advertise accredited investors only, granted, but I think that it has driven awareness of these types of deals into a more mainstream, Main Street instead of Wall Street type of area. Yeah. People understand this is now an investment that they can get involved in, and they know that they're not accredited, but maybe in researching this stuff, they figure out, oh, well, I can get involved in these other ways until I'm accredited. It's just pushed it into the collective financial consciousness where, whereas back before that, we didn't really know anything about it. It was hidden, rich get richer type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like it was behind closed doors, and it still is in a way. I mean, these are still private placement deals, That's why there's a BPM, It's called a private placement memorandum for a reason.
Yeah, but if in your network, because we'll do 506Cs every once in a while, that we can go put it all out on social media, send emails out to our people. We can do whatever we want with it, right? That doesn't mean we can accept all the investors who are interested. But how many investors were like, what are you up to? And have reached out to you and be like, tell me more about what this is that you're doing here. Like, how are you getting a $50 million apartment building? And they would never have known about that under the old rules because you couldn't talk about it at all.
I think it's a combination between old rules as well as the ability to communicate. Like, see, you and me, we do have platforms, just like we said, websites and podcasts, and we speak about it, and we have social media, and there is deals that are being published on those. So people tend to be like, what are you doing? And there's more exposure than there ever has been around this. And unless you're very particular, and you probably had to go to in-person meetings like I went yesterday in order to even get exposure to this. And then it's like this very limited knowledge that didn't originally find any way into the public.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the evil rich, and you had to inherit your money, and you're lucky because you got raised in a family that taught you about this stuff. That's the origin of all this. It's almost aristocratic, where your birthright stays with you your entire life. And the American dream it's not homeownership. It's the ability to leave the sphere in which you were born and aspire for something more. And the way that has been hasn't really facilitated that. But I'm seeing with this democratization of financing and the SEC understanding, like, small businesses are struggling to raise capital because these rules are onerous for small business owners. And so a lot of these rules and these changes that they've made over the past, 15 years, we just had some in 2021, are a way to make it easier for smaller businesses to get at the capital that they need, because they understand that small businesses are what forms the basis of the American economy. And if they're handicapping us too much to be able to go out and make money or hire people, because I don't have any employees, but I sure have a lot of property managers and lawyers and accountants, and I put a lot of money back into the economy, even though I'm not a direct employer. They have wanted and seen this and wanted to change things so that we could get at some money. Now, there are a lot of rules we need to follow. Don't get me wrong. There's still a lot of rules, but they're so much more open. Because when I heard about it, I never would have heard about it if those rules hadn't changed. I'm in the same boat. Like I said, a nice little white collar middle class family. Nobody was an accredited investor, right? And I never would have heard about this had it not been for that democratization of the information on how to offer securities to a wider array of people.
Yeah. Very much likewise on my end. I think I didn't have anybody in my immediate circle who opened the box of knowledge to me here. So this is very much something that I only because it was in the public domain eventually that I went and seeked it out in person and, educated myself on it.
Yeah, so, and we knew some real estate groups growing up, and they, like back in the mid to late 90s, who were trying to teach people how to do real estate and flip houses, the Carlton Sheets generation. And it was nothing like this. I mean, I knew a lot of those guys. They were in my neighborhood, and you could say, like, I did have access to people who were doing deals at a high level, but we didn't have any money. We didn't know what we were doing. And now it's to the point, it's like, oh, wait a second. I don't have to have my own money. I can go raise money from other people. And there is a legal pattern set out on how I do that. That was where I think the lid really got blown off, because my parents were always like, well, we can't do anything there. We don't have any money. You have to have money to make money. And every dime that they were making was going to pay for their lifestyle.
But that's also one of the money beliefs. Like, especially now, it's statistically proven that the majority of millionaires are not born rich. They didn't even inherit.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do we believe?
Yeah. I inherited my portion of my dad's house when we sold it. So my inheritance was based on real estate from a personal family home that was sold after my parents passed away. And then that's it. There's no more coming. They had a few little retirement account leftovers and things like that. But for the most part, like, the inheritance was pretty small. It didn't come with a whole lot of real estate knowledge. Now, that said, my parents did do lease options when I was growing up. I always thought that was pretty cool. I'm like, oh, wait, you don't have to sell your house. You can rent it out. And so that did kind of plant, like I said, it was a bunch of little things that would kind of come together. But say, like, I made my money off of buying our personal homes, off of the inheritance from my dad's house, my childhood home that I grew up in. But that's how we made our money, was real estate. And we've been able to then go magnify that by the changes to securities regulations so that we can get at a lot more money than I would ever be able to get at if I was on my own. And it allows me to function in my space of expertise. I don't have to do everything to be 100% partner. I can do just a couple of very limited things and get tiny bits of equity for that, because that's what I do and that's what I specialize in.
Yeah, but valuable bits of equity. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we're doing is, that with our particular expertise, there can be an equal success as a team, as a whole, that transfers into everybody benefiting from it, especially, also the passive investors who really just have to educate themselves on what they're getting invested in, and then they can benefit from the passive cash flow.
Mm-hmm. And there's been a shift also as we've gotten more of our own money to invest, from having to go out and scramble around and get a deal and run a deal, where it's like, okay, I have a little bit of money here that I want to invest, but I'm really not quite ready to just be a completely limited partner, because I have experience and I love this industry. And my husband hasn't quit his job yet, so I don't really want to be retired. I want to be semi-retired. And so my ability to go out and function inside of my little niche and get slivers of deals, I can't remember who said it, but he's like, I'd rather have 1% of 100 deals than 100% of one deal, or something like that. And that's how I feel, because it's really about how you want to spend your time. And for me, I want to spend my time in that $10,000 an hour thing and not the $50 an hour thing. Yeah. When we hire contractors, we hire real estate agents, where nobody's really doing this completely on their own. It's a spectrum. How far down this do you want to go? And I found that I'm just a lot happier at the other end of it, where I'm doing very little and getting very little in return for it, but I can repeat that at volume.
Yep. Well, Emma, I want to be respectful of your time. One of my favorite questions that I usually ask at the end is, what does it mean to you to have a life well lived?
I always use the word freedom. People will ask me this question. If you describe in one word what life is about, it's freedom. And that sounds ironic because I have a lot of things tying me down in the traditional sense of the word. I have a lot of kids, mortgage, all this kind of stuff. But I think freedom is a freedom of choice. I was able to choose that for myself. I was able to choose the way I wanted to live my life. A lot more freedoms. And I know my mom's mom was a feminist, my grandma, and it would really bothered her that my mom wanted to get married and have a bunch of kids and never finish her college degree. And she says, I basically, haven't I raised you to have more self-respect than that? And my mom always felt like, this is my choice. You fought hard that this would be a choice for me rather than the only thing I was able to do. And that really impacted me as a kid, that time freedom and choice freedom was paramount for me. It didn't matter what I chose, whether it be mainstream or off the beaten path, as long as I'm the one who got to choose it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much again, for sharing your mindset and your entire story with us. And your website is highrise.group. That's where people can find your investor club. And I mean, obviously you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, and soon on podcasts. You already have a name for your podcast?
Yeah, I do actually. It matches my Instagram account, which is Passive Income Adventures, where we just talk about anything related to passive income, the adventures we go on, how we get it, how we network. It's just going to be a lot of fun just talking about the myth of passive income and how close you can get to that impossible ideal.
Yeah, but I like the way you put it in the beginning. Passive income is having action first to make it passive eventually. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Well, the residual adventure show just doesn't sound as good.
Yeah, it really doesn't. Residual adventure show. Well, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.